ready?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What are you currently reading?
Oh, my. The most interesting thing I've read recently, which I actually just finished, was 9th Street Women. And it's about 5 women who were very active in the abstract expressionist movement. Lee Krasner, Elaine de Kooning, Grace Hardigan, Joan Mitchell, and Helen Frankenthaler. I was especially interested in the book because I've met 2 of them, and I knew many other people in the book. It was a great book for me. I haven't been recommending it to other people because in paperback it's 700 pages long, 500 of which are text and 200 of which are documentation. But for somebody who got into art through abstract expressionism, it's absolutely wonderful. And aside from the 2 women I met many of the other folks who show up in there.
What's your current favorite color, and how does your mood influence what your favorite color might be?
My mood does not influence what my favorite color might be, and I really don't have a favorite color. As a matter of fact, if I have a show and a bunch of people say, "Gee, do you do everything in blue?" I won't touch blue for a couple years as a major color in pieces. You know, I want to have that versatility to go everywhere with it. Now, you know from the show that's up with you and from what you're seeing in the studio that I've been doing a lot of things that make use of black lately. Not because it's my favorite color, just because I like the idea of hiding some things in sort of the twilight time. You know, that time of night when you look at something and what you see is 80% what you think in your mind and 20% what you can actually see, so you're working at forming it up. And so the dark is being used for that, but it's not a favorite color.
When you start to paint, do you know how a painting will end?
Man, I barely know how it'll start when I start a painting. Matter of fact, when I was first starting painting in college, it would have been in the early 60s, I realized that getting started was really hard. You know, you got this beautiful flat thing. So I'd usually stretch, 8 to a dozen canvases. I'd lay them out in the ground, turn my back to them, throw paint over my shoulder. It would land on them. And so they were screwed up, they were started, and we were off running. I think of making a painting a lot more like I think of a conversation. You go to it, you assume you have the skills to do it, and you have the conversation partly to find out how it develops, what's going to happen. If I had a real notion of what a painting was going to look like when I started, I'd be bored to death trying to make it.
Describe your typical day of work.
Well, the typical day of work will actually start the evening before, because I like to get all pre-planned so that I sort of wake up and I'm ready to go. It's very common for me to have the water set out, my water containers set out and stuff like that. I'll have the work piece I'm working on set up. I will arrange things in the studio. If I'm starting a lot of paintings, I pretty much clear the studio. I like to give myself that feeling that I don't have any paintings and I need to make them. And they just sort of move from this end of the studio along. And what we're seeing behind me is the painting I've most currently been working on. And normally I wouldn't want a painting that I was working on to be shown, but this one is probably finished. And it's just sort of hanging here at the moment for evaluation reasons. So I get all the mechanics done. As you can gather from my story about stretching the 8 or 12 canvases, I'm always well ahead on being set up with canvases. When I was doing my big New York shows, I'd probably have about 2 sessions a year of building stretchers and stuff and stretching canvases, and I'd prepare about 30 canvases each session, so that I was set to go. So when I come in, I want it to come in and be painting as fast as possible in the morning.
Do you listen to music while you work? If so, what's your go-to?
Yes, and blues.
Blues? Any certain artists?
No, I move around quite a bit from one to the other. Tends to be a lot of the older, more traditional artists.
How do you determine the subject of the painting?
The subject for me is actually it's sort of like a framework to hang abstract painting on. And so very often I'm thinking about what is convenient to work with, or what lends itself to something that I want to do abstractly. If I'm doing the koi paintings, which I've done on and off since the mid-90s, it's usually because I want to do something where I'm moving around the canvas a lot and where I know there's going to be a lot of motion. I had somebody who had purchased one of my koi paintings, and they were interested in getting another painting, and just when they emailed me, just by way of reintroducing themselves to me, they said, "We purchased one of your motion paintings," and referred it to that instead of as a koi painting. And I said, yeah, these are people I want to deal with. They're really looking at what I'm at. Like with these trees behind me. I've done six paintings, I think, involving the trees. You've got a couple of them in your show. Those are simply something that we see out I've got a good bit of woods view out the back. And if you're up in the dining room, there's glass out there. And Jane looks out into those woods all the time. She'll get up early in the morning and eat down there and have the lights off inside so she can look out, watches birds and stuff. And I thought, Jesus, it must be something I can do with those, And I just thought about it for years. And all of a sudden I realized what I was really interested in was not the trees, but the spaces between the trees and the stuff that flickered. So I said, yeah, let me try that. Subject can easily change for me midway in making a painting. The only paintings that doesn't happen in are the koi paintings. It did happen in one of them, one of the first 10 I did, but it was because I made it too small and there wasn't enough space for the koi to move around in. But I hardly changed it. I turned it into a painting of a big vase with koi on it. But it's really common for them to go, they can start as a landscape, turn into a still life.
What's the fastest painting you've ever completed, and what's the longest it's taken you?
Well, the longest one is easy because it's hanging in my living room now, and that was 44 years in the making. You kind of got to be an old artist to have that happen. I don't know what the fastest would be. There was one recent one that got done really quick and really easy. It's a small white one. It's in your show. Incredibly popular. I've had so many offers from people who want to buy that piece, but it's one I want to hang on to. And they go through a kind of stage. The first stage of making a painting for me is just getting crap on the canvas to start with. And in that case, I had 6 small ones, and I was putting in some angled light as it comes through Venetian blinds. And on 5 of them, I put a vase in the center. On one of them, I put cups down at the bottom. That happened to be the one that the cups were at the bottom, and it really didn't work. And so I don't ever really white something out, but I took white paint, transparent, and painted it over the bottom of that, and set it aside just to work on, you know, and added a vase in there while I was doing it. I came back and looked at it the next day, and I said, I don't know where to go on this one. And luckily I had the other 5 going, so I hung it on the wall and just left it while I did those. Well, with a few little touch-ups, it became a really strong painting. Now, I've tried about 8 times to do a second one like it, and I can't do it. It just won't work. And, well, in a way you could say, okay, that painting took 2 months to make, but maybe it was more like it took 3 days to make with a month of viewing to confirm it.
Describe a transformative experience you've had in a museum, perhaps a time when you were struck by a specific piece of art.
Easy. When I was an undergraduate, I'm doing abstract expressionist work, and I wanted to try to figure out how could I bring some subject into this and some figure and stuff. And I was messing around with it and trying to do it. Very clumsy beginning stuff. And the Walker Art Museum, I was at the University of Minnesota at the time. I was not an art major, but I was taking art classes. And one of the great advantages of not being an art major was I didn't have to take the beginning classes. I actually had talked them into letting me start in a junior level painting course. The guy who signed me up was really funny. I was so persistent, and he really didn't want to do it. And finally he says, okay, I'll put you in it. And under his breath he says, in the other guy's section. And that's where my luck really was great. The other guy turned out to be Ed Corbett, major New York painter, one of 15 painters included in an early Museum of Modern Art show about abstract expressionism, long time representation with Grace Bordnight Gallery. And I'm sure I was a trial for him because I was pretty amateurish, but he certainly let me see something. And now I've taken such a rabbit trail, I forget what the question was.
A transformative experience you've had in a museum.
Yeah, so anyhow, I'm trying to get this figurative stuff into it, and the Walker Art Museum in Minneapolis has this show about new images of man, about new things that are happening in figurative painting. And they were in an old house that had been converted, and there was, as you walked in, there was a staircase, and there was one great hanging spot right at the top of it. And they had a Nathan Oliveira painting there. I think it may have been Man with a Walking Stick, but it was one of those singular figures in the center. It was like the answer it was the perfect answer to everything I'd been trying to do. Interestingly enough, when I was living in New York, Oliveira had a show there. So I went down to the opening. And I thought, you know, this guy was going to be really pleased at what a great impact this painting had on me. And I went and tried to talk to him about it. And he's pretty much like, yeah, kid, I'm selling paintings here. I did go to another opening of his later, but I didn't bother to talk to him that time. I still respect his paintings a great deal.
If you weren't a painter, what do you think you'd be doing?
I have no idea. It was, you know, I just was, I graduated in the lower half of my high school class. I didn't want to go to college. I got to college, I knew I'd never get through. So I thought, I'll go hang out with my buddy Mike, he's an art major. And I went over there, and then I had this good luck of getting in Ed Corbett's class and then another pretty high level instructor also. And they later, and it just captured me. I rented, even for a while, I rented a store as an undergraduate. As an undergraduate, non-art major, I rented a store to use as a studio. I had never really had all that much success at anything before it. And the irony is here, I thought I couldn't graduate from college, and now I've got an academic PhD. Go figure.
How did having a painting included in the 1975 Whitney Biennial affect the rest of your body of work?
I'm not real sure that it affected the body of my work. It certainly affected my career in a big way. These early teachers who had been involved in abstract expressionism gave me this great desire to get to New York and to try to be represented by a gallery there. And I thought that being in the Whitney Biennial was my ticket into being in a gallery in New York. So I took a year off. I'd been teaching for 6 years here. I was due for a sabbatical. I took the full year sabbatical, got a grant from the Arts Commission, put together all my own money, moved to New York, rented 3/5 of what had been Andy Warhol's old factory, lived and worked in that. And fortunately did get with David Findlay Galleries in New York, and actually had my first solo show with them while I was still there that year in February of '76, and ended up being represented by them for 35 years until they finally closed because they had no family members left alive who could actually run it. And had 14 solo shows with them over the years. And I realized, though, later, that the Whitney Biennial was not a ticket into the gallery. The Whitney Biennial was a ticket into making me think I was good enough to go and get a gallery there and to give me the confidence to do that. You need a lot of confidence when approaching New York galleries. There were a ton of galleries and very few slots for artists. Findlay, actually, David Findlay Jr., who brought me into the gallery, he later told in my company, he told a client, he said, "I have never accepted an artist into the gallery who walked in off the street." I decided not to remind him that he might have accepted one.
What's the hardest moment you've had as an artist?
The hardest moment I've had as an artist. I don't know the answer to that. There are constant hard moments when you don't, when you put your work out there and don't get in, and put your work out there and don't get in. And I think that's something that anybody in any of the arts has to put up with. It'd be hard to identify a singular one of those.
Is there anything you want to say to the world?
Well, if you're talking about in my paintings, do I want to say anything to the world? I really hate the notion of didactic paintings. It feels to me in a didactic painting that the artist is saying, "I am the artist, I know this, I'm going to teach you this." I mean, whoever was turned on by that kind of an approach, what I want to do in my paintings is I want to open up a conversation with my audience so that I put something out there, they respond, and there's a dialogue. It's the same way I make the paintings. Get them started and try to watch for how the painting comes to want to define its own personality. And when I get a hint of that, it's usually just a hint, then I start pushing it in that direction. And then it gives me more hints. I want my paintings to be dynamic. And dynamic means changing. And we all know that a painting is in fact a frozen in space object. So the dynamicness has to come by changes that occur in how the person views the piece. And there's many, many ways to do that. Some have to do with layering so that you see other images coming through from underneath. Some have to do with painting things that have emotion so that you have the feeling that if you look away from the painting, when you look back, it will have changed. Some have to do with making paintings that the experience from a distance is different than the close-up experience. There's a painting, a big painting that you have in your show. Got some ocean and some waves. When you're back, the waves look like waves. If you walk up close to that painting, it's very hard to relate those marks to waves. In fact, some of it's like white gessoed canvas with little drips showing through, and the blueness of the ocean is over it. It's a very abstract thing, and it really brings you back to paint. I want my paintings to be something that is an interactive experience, but an interactive experience that continues to change and grow over the years. And actually, I find things in them that are different. I find things in them that I forget. In the middle of one of the tours that I was giving, in the middle of the third tour, I was up close to a painting, and I discovered something in it that I remembered it having been in there, and there it was. And what it is, just for your own curiosity, if I haven't showed you, it's in that big ocean painting. There's 3 figures in that painting. But they're not really pertinent to it anymore. They're just like, they're ghosts of what could be. I remember seeing a Picasso Blue Period painting in the Chicago Art Institute, and it was an interior room, and there obviously had been a figure in it, and it had been painted out. Now, what I really remember is that this figure was there. It made me think about, like, if you and I went and we visited your childhood bedroom. Now, we went in it, we'd both be looking at the same thing, but we sure would not be seeing the same thing. You would be seeing many layers of the past there. And this figure buried in the wall was like a layer of the past of this painting that richened it.
All right, so we'll go into the this or that now. Light or dark?
Absolutely equal. You can take the light. Oh, I don't have to comment.
You can.
One thing, overlighting or over darkening in a painting can put things into that range where you can't entirely see what you're looking at, and the mind has to work on it and produce it. And that's one of the interactive conversational things that can happen in viewing them.
Mustache or beard?
Well, or nothing. I don't much care. I've got the beard right now. You know, I had a mustache once for 42 years running, and I had a beard for 18 of those years, and it was a bigger one than this. Then I took it all off, and then I thought, I wonder if it's the same color as it used to be, so I grew it back, and a little bit of it's the same color it used to be, most of it isn't.
Inside or outside?
Outside.
Rothko or Mondrian?
Rothko.
Morning person or night owl?
Morning.
Jazz or classical?
Jazz.
That's all I got. Anything else?
We probably covered more than you meant to.
It was great.